It was far too late to be driving alone, but I had no other choice. The meeting had run over, and by the time I left, it was past midnight. The highway was deserted, just an endless stretch of blacktop beneath a moonless sky. The only light came on from my headlights, cutting through the darkness like a knife. I wasn't even sure how much longer I could stay awake, but the thought of a motel wasn't appealing. I just wanted to get home. The rhythmic hum of the engine began to lull me into a daze when I saw him. A figure standing by the side of the road, his arm extended, thumb outward. I don't know why I slowed down. There was something off about him, even from a distance. His clothes were dirty, his posture slumped, but I figured maybe he'd had just a rough day. Maybe he needed help. As I approached, I saw his face, or at least what little of it was visible beneath the hood of his jacket. He looked young, maybe mid-30s, but there was something in his eyes that seemed hollow. He didn't smile when I stopped, just gave me a brief nod, muttered thanks, and climbed into the passenger seat. The tension hit me immediately. I could feel it radiating from him like static electricity, the kind that makes your hair stand on end. The interior of the car felt suddenly small, the space between us suffocating. I tried to brush off the feeling, tell myself it was just late, and I was just tired. But still, my grip on the steering wheel tightened as I pulled back onto the highway. "Where are you headed?" "Anywhere but here." That wasn't exactly reassuring, but I kept my eyes on the road. The quiet between us was heavy, broken only by the soft rumble of the tires against the asphalt. I kept sneaking glances at him from the corner of my eye, but he barely moved. His head was tilted down, his face hidden beneath the shadow of his hood. Something wasn't right. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and a cold chill slid down my spine, despite the warm air blasting from the vents. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. My heart pounded faster, but I kept telling myself it was fine. I just needed to get him to wherever he was going, and then I'd be alone again. Then, without warning, he lunged at me. 1 second, he was sitting quietly, and the next, his hands were on the steering wheel, yanking it hard to the right. The car swerved violently, tires screeching as we veered off the road. I shouted, instinctively trying to pull the wheel back, but his grip was like iron. He was strong, far stronger than he had looked. The car was spinning, the headlights flashing wildly across the trees as we headed towards the ditch. "What the hell are you doing?" He didn't answer. His face twisted into something animalistic, eyes wide and crazed. His free hand swung toward me, aiming for my throat. I barely managed to block it, using one arm to fend him off while the other clung to the wheel for dear life. I was losing control of the car and of the situation. The tires hit the gravel shoulder and the whole vehicle jolted as we plunged down into the ditch. My head snapped forward, and the seatbelt bit into my chest as we slammed into something hard. The sound of crunching metal filled my ears, and shards of glass flew through the air like deadly confetti. For a moment, everything went black. When I came to, I was slumped over the wheel, the scent of gasoline thick in the air. The engine had died, leaving behind an eerie silence, save for the ticking of cooling metal. Blood was dripping from a gash on my forehead, but I was alive. My body ached, every breath labored, but I was still breathing. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, and turned to the passenger seat, expecting to see him. I was ready to fight back, ready for him to still be there, crazed and violent, but the seat was empty. The passenger door was wide open, swaying slightly in the breeze. The night air flooded into the car, cold and sharp against my skin, was gone. My pulse quickened, panic rising around me. I scanned the darkness outside. Where the hell did he go? The road was empty, the stretch of highway silent and still. There were no other cars, no movement, just the faint rustling of leaves in the distance. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I unbuckled my seatbelt with shaking hands, wincing as pain shot through my ribs. Every muscle in my body screamed from the crash, but adrenaline kept me moving. I pushed open my door, stumbling out onto the soft earth of the ditch. My legs were unsteady beneath me, the ground uneven as I tried to stand. The car was a wreck, its front end crumpled against a tree, steam rising from the cracked radiator. But the man, the hitchhiker, he was nowhere to be seen. I staggered a few steps away from the car, peering into the darkness, straining to hear something, anything, that would give his location away. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out the silence around me. He couldn't have gone far, not after a crash like that. I half expected him to jump out from behind a tree, his crazed eyes locked onto mine, ready to finish what we started. But there was nothing. I glanced back at the car, its headlights dim and flickering. A thought crept into my mind, slow and unwelcome. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe the crash had knocked something loose in my head. The idea seemed impossible, but then again, none of this made sense. Why would a random hitchhiker attack me like that? And where did he go? I forced myself to take a deep breath, steadying my nerves. I couldn't stay here. The car was totaled, and I was miles from the nearest town. My phone was somewhere inside the car, but I didn't even know if it had survived in the crash. With no other options, I made my way back to the car, trying to think clearly through the fog and fear of confusion. As I leaned into the driver's side to grab my phone from the console, I felt a shift in the air, a presence behind me. Before I could react, something slammed into me, hard. I was thrown against the car, my head smacking against the doorframe with a sickening thud. Pain exploded through my skull, and I crumpled to the ground, dazed and barely conscious. Through blurred vision, I saw him standing over me, the hitchhiker. His face was twisted with rage, his chest heaving with wild breaths. Blood smeared his hands, his fingers curled into tight fists. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, watching me with those empty eyes. I tried to scramble backward, but my body wasn't responding. My limbs felt heavy, useless, as if the crash had drained all the strength from me. I was completely at his mercy. For a moment, he just stared down at me, his face unreadable. Then, without warning, his hand lunged towards my throat. I tried pulling away, but there was nowhere to go. His grip tightened around my neck, and I felt my vision start to darken, my lungs screaming for air. But just as suddenly as he'd attacked, he let go. I coughed and sputtered, gasping for breath as he stood up and took a step back. His face had changed, no longer filled with rage, but something else, something almost like fear. He stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and then turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness without a sound. I lay there for what felt like hours, too stunned to move, too scared to make a sound. Eventually, I managed to drag myself to my feet, every inch of my body aching. I reached into the car, grabbed my phone, and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. When the police arrived, I told them everything: the hitchhiker, the attack, the crash. They searched the area for hours, combing the woods and the highway, but they never found him. To this day, I don't know who he was or why he did it. But sometimes, late at night when I'm driving alone, I still feel his presence, like he's watching, waiting for the right moment to finish what he had started.